So last week I went over the Fallowhide Hobbits, and this week we're going to be going over the Harfoots and the Store Hobbits and how they kind of came to the Shire and all of their backstory. Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. This is Gone with Gandalf, and every single Friday I do lore videos just like this. So if you like these kinds of videos, then please do like and subscribe. And yeah, I've had a haircut. It is absolutely freezing in here, but I guess I'll take off the coat. We will begin with the Harfoots, and again, just as the other Hobbit clans, about 2,000 years prior to the Lord of the Rings main events, they were in the Vale of Anduin, and they primarily lived within the foothills of the Misty Mountains, close to the river Gladden. It was actually this clan of hobbits that would first adopt living in smials, and smials are those hobbit holes which look quite cosy if you're not claustrophobic or anything like that. The Harfoots, they were generally shorter, they were browner of skin, they would wear no footwear, they had no beard, and then they'd also have slightly nimbler hands than perhaps other hobbits. So I don't know, maybe that would be good for gardening and things like that. Owing to the fact that they also lived just south of the Great Road and the High Pass, you know, several dwarves would pass right by them, and they would actually have quite good relations with the dwarves. But these good times, they would not last, and in the year 1050 of the Third Age, the same year as the Fallowhides would move from the southern eaves of Mirkwood into the Vales of the Anduin, this is actually when the Harfoots would already begin their westward migration, and they would go over the Misty Mountains into the lands of Arnor, and here, of course, they would encounter the Dunedain, and this is when the hobbits, all hobbits, would first be recorded in the annals of the Dunedain, and this is then when you get the name Peri Annath. The Harfoots would move pretty slowly on their journey, and they would go via Weathertop to Bree, so by the 1300s they'd be in Bree, and it would be another 300 or so years before they would follow the Fallowhide brothers of Marcher and Blanco, cross the Brandywine River, and found the Shire in 1601. And as I said in last week's video for the Fallowhides, the majority of all settlers of the Shire, they were Harfoots. So there we go, that's kind of everything covered for them. So the third and final clan of the Hobbits, they are the Stoors, and many of you might already know of this clan, but we'll get to that later on. Now, so these were probably the greatest travellers of the Hobbits, in the fact that their migration took many paths, and there were definitely some divergences, whereas the other two clans, they all went in one direction and ended up in the same location. Now, once again, in around the 10th, 11th century of the Third Age, the Store Hobbits, they would live in the Vale of Anduin, in the kind of swampy areas of the Gladden River. These hobbits, they were heavier, they were broader, they had beards, and they actually had larger hands and feet than the other two clans of the hobbits. And, well, they were fisherfolk, and they were also the most alike to men. So if we just go through the different hobbits again, Fallowhides were most alike to elves, the Harfoots were most alike to dwarves, and here we have the Stoors most alike to men, which is quite interesting, really, because you would have thought the hobbits that could grow beards would be most alike to dwarves, but there we go. Well, let's get on to the really interesting part of the Stoors, because their migration path is quite convoluted. So we'll begin with the year 1150 of the Third Age, so 100 years after the Harfoots first left the Vale of Anduin. This is when the Stoors then migrated westwards, but they took the Redhorn Pass. So not the High Pass like the Fallowhides and the Harfoots, they took the southern pass closer to Moria, and they would then settle in and around the Angle, or between the lands of Tharbad and Dunland. There's quite a swampy area there, and off the top of my head I think it's called the Nin in Eilf, but don't quote me on that, you can check the map on the screen. But again, that is quite swampy land, and that is what they like. But between the years of 1356 and 1409 then, some from the Angle would actually go and cross the Misty Mountains and go eastwards back into Wilderland and back to the area around the Gladden River. And you might wonder, why would you go away from civilization, if you like? And that's because Angmar had begun its attacks down into the lands of Arnor. And, you know, the Hobbits, they're not fond of that. So, obviously, they fled. But some of them did then go eastwards. Eventually, this would then pass, and then the year 1630, so 29 years after the formation and settling of the Shire by the Hobbits, the Stoors of Dunland, so those that were further south of the Angle, they travelled to the Shire, and they would predominantly settle in the areas of the East Farthing and Buckland. Again, that's quite swampy ground, and those hobbits of the East Farthing, actually, some of them were noted to wear dwarf boots, particularly when it was muddy. So if you've, perhaps if you've seen the films, none of the hobbits are obviously wearing any shoes, any footwear, but it is noted that some of them might on occasion, particularly in the East Farthing. But due to the well-travelledness of the Store Hobbits, they actually had their own dialect as well. Those in the Shire would speak slightly different Westron, perhaps, than the others. Obviously, they could still communicate, but then they also had their own thing going on as well. I'm sure you guys can relate in your own countries. Languages evolve, and these guys, they'd been living in Dunland for so long that theirs had evolved as well. But the Store Hobbits have something a little bit extra in store for us, because hobbits in general, they fear drowning. Well, they fear water, but they obviously fear drowning in water. And indeed, Frodo's own father did die, Drogo. He died in a boating accident in the Brandywine River. But the Store Hobbits, they actually, being fisherfolks, they did actually learn to swim. And, well, this is a good point then to divert back to those Store Hobbits that went from the Angle and went back to the Wilderland. They would actually go back to kind of a primitive way of life, and they would build boats, reed boats, and they would just fish in the Gladden or in the River Anduin, and that was that. Now, of course, we know of one hobbit in particular, quite infamous. You might know them as Gollum, and Gollum was a Store Hobbit, and in the year around 2430 of the Third Age, this is when he was kind of living in and around Gladden, and his cousin Diego, he of course found the One Ring in the River Anduin whilst they were fishing, and Smeagol wanted it and he killed him, and they had a matriarchal society in this area, and eventually he would get booted out by his grandmother, and that is when he kind of went delirious and went crazy with the One Ring, and eventually found himself in the Misty Mountains. But again, that's a nice little perk of the Store Hobbits. So they've all got their own differences. Some have beards, some don't. Some like languages, some like to hunt, some like to farm, some can swim, some can drown. So there you go. That is all of the hobbits, their origins, their migration patterns. I think some of that's quite interesting. I hope that you've enjoyed these, and if you've got any suggestions, put them down in the comments. I will gladly do some videos on them in the future. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I am now going to go with Gandalf. Good day. I'm going to be saying Har Foots, because, I guess grammatically it would be Har Feet, but because it's a name, I think it's going to be Har Foots. I'm not entirely sure on that one.